right, I think we will get going here. Hi, my name is Lisa Smith, and I am the immediate past president of MNSHAPE. I'm joined here with Tom Roberts, our current president of MNSHAPE. And we are so excited to have you all here continuing our year-long conference. For all of you, our members, and everyone that could join us today, we are just so excited to have you, and we hope to see you every month on the second Thursday of every month. Every month we'll be talking about a different topic, and we'll be bringing some really great quality professional development for you guys. So please spread the word and let your colleagues know too, and check our website for all that information. But we will be continuing this every month, and we are really happy to be able to be doing that for you guys. This evening we are joined by the incredible Mary Thissen-Milder from the Minnesota Department of Education. She is the the physical education consultant. Is that your real title? Like, that's the title they give you?
That's the real title. Yep.
The consultant part's kind of funny, but I feel like she's more like the guru, so we're going to call you that instead. But Mary has been an incredible rock for our community and connecting MNSHAPE with the state of Minnesota and MDE, and really making sure that we are prepared and everything for our transition and switch to these new standards that were so carefully crafted by the team that she put together for our state. And I am just so happy to have her here with us tonight. She's going to lead us through her presentation and talk about a lot of questions and take a lot of questions and whatnot. So if you do have questions, just put them in the chat, and we'll be taking those throughout the presentation this evening. So with that, I'll pass it on to you, Mary.
Okay, great. You know, it's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to partner with MNSHAPE to do this. This opportunity for professional development really hits a needed target, and I think this is a great way to kick off all of these monthly Zoom meetings. So I'd like this to really be sharing space for us. I'll initiate some conversation by providing information in terms of requirements, and then I'll pause and ask questions. I've asked members of the MNSHAPE board to serve as a panel and respond to the questions. However, I'd also like this to be an open forum for everyone else as well. So feel free to either unmute yourself if you have something to share as the panel people are answering, or you can, like Lisa said, write it in the chat. She's monitoring, and once I start sharing my screen, I won't be able to see it, so she'll let me know. I would ask you, when you speak, please identify yourself and the level you teach and the school where you teach, and the same for the chat. That's just going to be helpful for all of us. I really want this to be a conversation between teachers. I, as a State Department, will tell you requirements, but I want you folks with your boots on the ground and problem solved through a lot of this already, and I hope that it's a sharing opportunity. And then I'm hoping what we talk about today is going to flow into January, February, March, and April as our next things go. So for right now, I'm going to try to share my screen. I have had major technical difficulties today, so I am just hoping that this all works. So this. And here. Nope, I need this. Come back to me. Okay. So let me just move you guys out of my way. Over here. Okay. So here's the agenda for today. It's divided into two parts. Part one, we're going to talk about health and safety protocols because that's what's driving us in the midst of COVID. We'll talk about face coverings and social distancing, equipment and sanitation, dressing out in locker rooms, and activity selections based on risk during COVID. These are decisions and things that you guys are doing every day. And it's just going to be helpful to have a forum to discuss how it's working for you. And then part two is going to be around the academic standards, and we're going to specifically hit around the social emotional learning things or standards or benchmarks. Then we'll talk about recommendations for instruction, assessment, and some sample activities in the learning models. And then I'm hoping that you'll be able to share resources with each other that you're using during COVID. So with that, let's get started. For health and safety requirements, we're required as a state to follow the health requirements set by MDH. And MDH sets, of course, gets them from CDC. The two documents identified in this slide provide the important information for physical education. As you know, the documents, the documents are updated as COVID ebbs and flows. So these documents have gone through some different titles and some different iterations. For example, a recent change that's not even on these documents yet is the latest as the CDC has come out around quarantining, and it has taken that 14-day time, changing it from to 7 days after exposure with a negative test, or to 10 days with no test, but they still really want you to have 14 days if you really can. So that's all new stuff that will be in these documents that aren't yet. I actually just downloaded these on Monday, and they've already changed since I've done that. So I'll also be using information from Shape America's reentry guidance document, as well as the MDE school guidance for PE document for the 2021 school year. So let's start with face coverings. As you're aware, we have a requirement to wear face coverings in all indoor businesses and public indoor spaces per the executive order from our governor. And also when you're working outdoors in situations when social distancing can't be maintained. And that executive order is still in place, and it went in place in July. It's kind of interesting to know that this is December and we've been doing that for so long. So you people that are in the classrooms or in school, when you're in school, there's some flexibility around face shields. So students and staff have flexibility to wear face shields instead of the face coverings to allow for visibility of facial expressions and lip movements and for speech perception in certain situations. The situations include like students in kindergarten through grade 8 where wearing a face covering is otherwise problematic. Students who are unable to tolerate a face covering due to developmental, behavioral, or medical conditions. Teachers, that's you guys of all grades, when a face covering would impede the educational process, and for staff providing direct support of our student services when a face covering would interfere with the services provided. There are exemptions. Exemptions include individuals with medical condition, mental health condition, disability that makes it unreasonable for the individual to maintain a face covering, including, but it's not limited to, individuals who have medical condition that compromises their ability to breathe, individuals who are unconscious or incapacitated, or otherwise unable to remove a face covering without assistance. And obviously these individuals should consider using alternatives to face coverings, including clear face shields or staying home as much as possible. There are also situations in which a face covering may be temporarily removed, like when you're eating or drinking or when a person's alone in an office or cubicle walls are higher than the face level, provided that social distancing is maintained. Executive Order 2081 also allows for temporary removal of a face covering during activities when a face covering would get wet, like swimming or showering, or when exercising or participating in organized sports when the level of exertion makes wearing a face covering difficult. And people who can tolerate wearing a mask while exercising should do so. With high exertion and breathing, the potential for more respiratory droplets to be released in the air is increased. And for activities where folks are allowed to remove their face coverings, it's particularly important for our gyms to implement measures like occupancy controls, equipment placement, things like that, to ensure strict social distancing guidance for 6 feet or greater, in addition to maximizing other infection control practices. And when not exercising, folks or your students should wear your face coverings. For example, when moving around the building, when in the lobby, when waiting for fitness classes start, like that. So MNSHAPE and MDE are partnering to provide a place where you can ask questions related to the pandemic called the COVID Corner. And here's a recent question. Should students be allowed to participate in elementary PE with their mask off in an indoor setting for all activities? And after I just read that the answer to that is yes, masks may be removed temporarily during physical activity. The best practice is students can remove masks indoors during physical activity, but should put them back on during instruction. And when outdoors, masks can be removed as long as students are able to physical distance. And here's another question we were asked, or what's the consequence for students who refuse to wear a face covering? And this answer actually came from the MDE Special Education Due Process document. And it really talks about that students without any of the conditions identified in that previous slide from the in that executive order that prevents them from being able to tolerate wearing a face covering, school districts and charter schools are first encouraged to use positive behavioral interventions or something like PBIS to teach and model and change the culture of the school. But in an event that a student without that condition cited above continually refuses to wear that mask, then your school district or your charter school can consult normal discipline policies. However, again, they really want you to use PBIS first. So here we come to the first panel questions. There are two of them and you can answer either one or both. And one, if for teaching physical education outside, what has been your experience using face coverings? And the second one is for teaching physical education inside in a setting such as a gym, what has been your face covering experiences, and identify any issues with students wearing face coverings. And again, please introduce yourself, your school, level you teach. I won't call on you because I can't see you. So please just step right in and I appreciate it. Thanks guys, we're gonna learn more the more we all share.
Mary, I'll start. I'm Cindy Johnson. I teach in the ESCO school district. Right now I'm teaching grades 3 through 6, and then I teach adapted PE kindergarten through 12th grade. Outside, we wear our masks until we get outside, and then we take our masks off. Kids are pretty much spaced out as suggested by the rules, 6 feet. I have cones and spots and things outside so they stay apart from one another. Inside, I haven't had anybody refuse to wear a mask at all. We did receive an email from the nurse giving us instructions on to a few students that could wear a face shield or not wear a mask at all. I have one adapted student that wears a face shield, and I have another adapted student that wears no mask. So I have not had too many issues with masks. I also allowed students or told them, if you're more comfortable leaving your mask on 100% of the time, please do so.
Thanks, CJ. How about if we get one more folks to share with before we move on?
Mary,
Sure.
I can go next, Mary. This is Tom Roberts. I'm president of MNSHAPE, and I teach K through 5 physical education in the St. Louis Park School District, along with Jody Stefanowitz, who's also on this call and also a board member. And we actually have not been delivering our specials in person since the beginning of the year. We started out in distance, then we went to half-day hybrid. And when we were in half-day hybrid, our kids would go home at 11:45, and then the specials would be delivered virtually in the afternoon. So, and when we went to full virtual here a little while ago, we just continued to deliver the specials in the afternoon. So that's kind of where we're at in St. Louis Park.
I can speak to a secondary experience if you'd like. Also, Mary, will your slides be available for everyone afterwards, or?
Yes, they will be available, but what I'll need to do is I can send them, I'll probably send them to Megan and have her post them on the website. That might be the easiest thing to do at this point, okay?
That's just fine, no problem. No worries. Okay, so secondary, I teach high school PE and health at Lakeville South High School, and Lisa Smith, sorry again. And we started out the year in hybrid. And so we were mostly outside, and my students wore their masks when they came into class and all throughout instruction in the beginning. And then when we started moving, it was their choice if they wanted to remove it or not. For most of the time that we were outside. So basically, as soon as we got outside, we walked to our space, any other instruction that was given. And then when it was time to, physically move, they could take them off. Most of them just put them on their wrists or put them in their pockets. And then if I needed to stop them and bring them in together, my classes were pretty small. I think my biggest class, because we were at half size, was 15. So when we were outside, they could spread out pretty far and, be away from each other if they were trying to, catch their breath and whatnot. But they knew that they needed to keep their distance. I always had my mask on, even when I was instructing outside. So I always had it on. But it was a personal choice for the kids. When we got inside, or the few days we were inside, we stayed with the same protocols, and we had no issues with it whatsoever. And we had no cases, none. In our class that were spread. I have another question about using the locker rooms. Are we going to touch this later, Mary, or should I? Okay, I'll wait on that.
Okay.
And we'll get there in a minute.
Yeah, no problem. And I think you brought up an interesting point too, it's about teacher choice too, about when you're wearing a mask and when you're not, and when you're, I think Shape America said something about using microphones or trying to, use things to help your voice get louder. But I know that's also a decision around teachers that are trying to figure out why they're teaching. Okay, so let's just move on here. This next section is really just about that social distancing piece that you've already kind of talked about. And that instruction has to occur in a location where students and staff can respect physical distancing guidelines and remain the 6 feet apart. And if available facilities do not have sufficient space, then your class sizes really have to be adjusted to allow for that physical distancing space. And classes should not be combined, and class size should not be increased for physical education unless the space can accommodate for that. And more space for instruction, of course, may be required for physical education due to the increased respiration of students participating. And it's really up to each school to evaluate outdoor spaces. And it was great when we could be outdoors, and they want FIA to be outdoors whenever possible. But they also MDH does want you to, especially at the elementary level, to avoid the use of playground equipment, benches, or other permanent structures when you can't really sanitize them as quickly as you need to. And you need to identify where locations and activities where social distancing is going to be hard, and reconfigure things to make it more feasible. And of course, access into the area that you're teaching in must not be permitted, or activities must not be performed if adequate social distancing can't take place. The other social distancing requirements, that if students are required to remain in the classroom for all instructional periods throughout the day, then physical education teachers may rotate through the classrooms to deliver instruction. But if that occurs, you have to be, as physical educators, you got to be familiar with the classroom and the spaces where instruction is going to be delivered, so you can adjust your lessons and activities to the space available. You've got to plan and incorporate marked off areas, like, I don't care if you use poly spots, cones, visual aids, to ensure physical distancing for your students. And you got to talk with your classroom teachers and talk about transporting the students if they're coming from the classroom to your physical education space. And students need to know how to do that, and you need to provide the guidance for doing that. And again, the visual aids and stuff like that, all of that is incredibly important. So let's just touch on physical distancing very quickly, because again, this is something that you've touched on before, but 2 questions. When outdoors or in the gym, what are some strategies you've used to make sure students physical distance? And if any of you provide physical education in a classroom, How does that work for you? And how do you ensure that physical distancing occurs? It's back to you guys now.
I can speak on the first question. My name's Derek Pika. I'm the president-elect of MNSHAPE. I teach at an elementary school in Austin, Minnesota, grades 1 through 4. We actually started our school year late July on a modified calendar, so I got a lot of time outdoors. When I was outside, I spray painted dots on our blacktop area. There were 6 feet apart. Those were used during instruction and for warm-ups and for cool downs. And at that time, I only had 15-minute periods. They were really short, but that's what I did outside, and it worked pretty well. Now that I've transitioned to being able to use the gym, I use floor marks, which is basically a marker you can mark up your gym floor with. And I made 6 foot by 6 foot squares throughout the whole gym, and that represents the student's personal space. Again, used for whole group instruction, warm-ups, cool downs, and when the activity allows, they would stay in that space as well.
Thanks, Derek. You kind of got a good voice. Maybe you should get into radio.
I'm not sure about that one.
Can any of you address this whole thing about teaching FIAD in a classroom?
Sure. We do lectures in our classroom, and in the classroom, our admin went through every single classroom to make sure everybody was 6 feet apart, and they put orange dots where kids could sit. So it's pretty easy to continue to teach in the classroom, or we were teaching obviously hybrid, so online and distance. So we would address both students at the same time.
It's great. I can't see you. So who's speaking?
That was
Carla
Carla.
Norden.
Oh.
Carla Norden's from White Bear Lake.
Great, thanks.
912.
912. Okay. Okay.
Jody, are you on? Do you want to speak to what you guys were doing as far as going in the classroom? I don't know if she...
Jody Stefano is from St. Louis Park with Tom at the elementary level. And what we did at the beginning is each special would rotate. It would be a 10-minute little movement lesson, and we would just teach from the door. And then the students would just be kind of standing by their desk. There wouldn't be a lot of moving around, so we just did a lot of movement, kind of in place type stuff. But it was just a 10-minute lesson, then we would move to the next class, and we just kept rotating. We were only in half-day hybrid though, so that's probably why we stuck with the 10 minutes and then not being more than 15 minutes in contact. So that's how we did it at our school.
Thanks, Jody.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. All right, so moving on. Next, we're going to talk about in-school equipment, safety, and sanitation. Again, you've got to look at that MDH guidance because sometimes it changes and we need to stay on top of it. Equipment use has been a huge thing for physical education. The MDH guidance really talks about limit use of physical education equipment and eliminating the use of equipment that will be passed between or shared by multiple students throughout that same class period. For equipment that will be touched or handled by students within a class period, assign each student their own piece of equipment and then properly clean and disinfect the equipment between classes. And if you don't have equitable equipment for all students, or if the equipment can't be properly cleaned and disinfected between the classes, avoid the use of equipment altogether. And then you've got to build routines of hand hygiene into the daily school schedule for all students and staff, including hand washing or sanitation breaks between classes, and certainly remind those small ones, especially about hand washing techniques. And you probably have to remind your high schoolers too. And then, of course, if using equipment, keep extra materials available in case a piece of equipment being used becomes dirty or unsanitary during a lesson. And equipment that will be touched or handled by students should be cleaned with soap and water and then disinfected with an EPA approved disinfectant. And you need to look up on the CDC or MDH websites of what those disinfectants are. And disinfectants should not be used when students are, disinfectants should only be used on materials that students aren't going to put in their mouths. And staff should be properly trained on how to safely apply the disinfectant and have access to appropriate personal protective gears while you're doing it. And there should be sufficient ventilation when applying the disinfectant. And make sure that you check the label of that. And also you just need to have discussions within your school buildings about the procedures that they want you to use around disinfecting things. There's also a recommendation for you to keep students' belongings in a separate, safe and clean space, such as individually labeled cubbies, lockers and areas. Consider purchasing baskets to hold individual student belongings if previously mentioned spaces aren't available. And for those of you using equipment like treadmills or aerobic fitness things that involve high exertion, they've got to be positioned at least 6 feet apart with additional distancing maintained for each area around the equipment. And if the equipment cannot be positioned or configured to allow for proper physical distancing, the equipment must be blocked off and used, and it also has to be cleaned and disinfected between users. So here's another COVID corner question, and it's an easy one. Can we use equipment? Absolutely, you can use equipment, but for equipment that will be touched or handled by students, assign their own piece, and then they've got to be cleaned and disinfected between classes. And then can they share equipment? Not within the same class period. So you've got to limit the use of that equipment, and then you've got to wash it between class periods. So how often should we be cleaning equipment? And again, best practice is to clean the equipment after every class if the same equipment is going to be used during the school day. I know it's time consuming, but the guidance really addresses this very strongly, both CDC and MDH. Okay, so panel questions. You can answer any of them. Panel questions. Number one, how has the pandemic affected use of equipment in your physical education class? Two, when you're using equipment in physical education class, what's your sanitation process between classes? This one's an always interesting one because you're all doing it a little differently. And then for those of you who are using treadmills or other aerobic equipment, how are they sanitized between student use? Ball's back to you now.
Mary, this is Sue Tar, and I just wanted to throw in one easy solution that we found using multiple pieces of equipment in different classes throughout the day is we just had our students wear a golf glove, a batting gloves, something like that. And so then all kids can touch all the equipment because they can take the gloves home and wash them, or you can take them home, or you can take them and wash them. So I think that's a whole nother option that does not put skin to skin contact on equipment within the course of your PE setting.
I'm writing that down, Sue. That's, I thought about that before. That's great. Thank you.
And it is an expense, but maybe your PTA, if students don't already have the batting gloves or the golf gloves, maybe the PTA can have some type of fund to do that. So it is an expense though.
Okay, somebody else step in here and tell us how you're sanitizing between classes, or if you're using like treadmill equipment, how you're cleaning them, how they're being cleaned between student use.
This is
Brenda
Cindy.
Smith. Oh,
Go ahead, Brenda. Nope, go ahead.
Brenda Smith, Blue Earth Area School, Southern Minnesota. What I decided to do the second quarter was I got enough cup stackers or speed stack cups for one class. So they each got a stack of those, and that was their responsibility. And then another class got bean bags and juggling balls. And so they took those home. So the days on hybrid, when they were home, they had them at home, and when they came to class, they came to class and could demonstrate. And there's tons of videos and different things for them to use. But then I'm going to flip flop here now coming up after the holiday, and then I'm going to give the other group the other one. It's taken them longer to get the skills than I was hoping, but I only see them one day in person and one day online. So it's just taking forever because our hybrid schedule is just, yeah. But anyway, I like the idea of them having their own equipment. And so first quarter, what I did was like we did Frisbees. So that was easy to sanitize between classes. And yeah, we did disc golf and different things with Frisbees. So I just used the spray and the rags between classes for them.
Yeah, how much time did you have between your classes? Because that's
Excuse me?
an issue for some.
I didn't catch that. What'd you say, Mary?
How much time do you have between your classes?
Oh, not much. 4. But while the kids were doing ASAP warm up, then I would sanitize and set them out on the stage, and then they would pick them up, and then we take them outside. So we had a little bit of time because they just had some kind of a warm up while I was wiping them down.
Great.
This is Cindy Johnson again, ESCO schools, grades 3 through 6 and adapted. We were able to use equipment. Like with 3rd grade, we each had a beanbag. And before we even got into class, everybody had to hand sanitize. And then I had equipment spread out, and they had a piece of equipment. They used it throughout the time. And at the end of class, we have some wipes that the students can use to wipe their own equipment down. And if we didn't have time to wipe things down, I had a bin of used equipment that I would take care of later. And then I would have a bin of clean equipment, depending on the numbers, pieces of equipment that I had. We also have some sanitizer that only teachers can use. So that's labeled teachers only, and I kind of hide that away so no kids can use that. So the use of bins with used equipment and clean equipment has helped immensely. And then I have cubbies if they have to bring their iPads down.
Great, thanks, CJ.
Mary, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, Mary. Joe McCarthy, Farmington Elementary. A couple things that I did. A lot of front loading to me is the key. Planning ahead. So when students walked in the gym, I taped down 6-foot squares, 10 feet apart, 15 of them. Right. So the key is routine. Students came in, they knew exactly what to do. I also went to the dollar store and bought 15 blue baskets, and I placed them on the benches 6 feet apart. And inside each red square, there's a number. So the number that in the red square corresponded with the blue basket number. And that's where they could place any of their belongings if they wanted to. I also bought a 3-gallon spray bottle that I used in between classes, and I had 5 minutes in between the classes. So that worked out really well. And then finally, I just used my long noodles. Anytime a student used a piece of equipment and they were done, they put it in that rectangle of used by long noodles. At the end of class, I grabbed that 3-gallon spray bottle, I would spray it, the next class comes in, and everything is ready to go. So to me, the key is front loading, going to the dollar store, and then communicating with your custodians on spray bottles. And that worked out really well for me.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, I'm going to move us off this one now, and let's go on to the next place here. So now we're going to talk about dressing out in locker rooms. And this is really more relevant for middle and high school teachers. However, I know, elementary folks are really talking to your kids about shoes, things like that. And this is really SHAPE recommendations around dress. Allow students to participate to the best of their ability while wearing the clothes they wear to school. Encourage students to wear comfortable clothing and safe footwear that allows for safe movement and is appropriate to whatever weather situation you're in. And plan alternative activities for students who aren't wearing safe attire. And the alternative activity should really align with the same grade level benchmarks that the rest of the class is working towards that class period. And it's also recommended by SHAPE that schools eliminate the use of locker rooms and the requirement that students change into physical education uniform for participating in physical education. But MDH says this: showers and locker rooms may not be used unless partitions are established that create physical distancing between members, prominent queuing is maintained, or seating is arranged to ensure that members maintain physical distancing or of at least 6 feet at all times. And that members it really are your students, because this is also relevant to gyms. If physical distancing of at least 6 feet can't be maintained in that locker room or facility, it has to be closed. So those are the guidelines from SHAPE and MDH. So the one question here is, if you would be willing to describe your current dressing out policy, if you're doing that, and if you're not, please say that as well, because that would be helpful to know. And if you're using the locker room or not.
I can start with that. This is Lisa Smith, Lakeville South High School. So we did not require students to change. And we really just had very candid conversations. And because they came on an AB schedule, they were only coming to school 2 days a week. We kind of just asked them to please come to school in something that was comfortable and allowed you to participate fully, and gave them some specific examples of what would be something to avoid, but also we did give them the option to change if they wanted to. I had a few that took us up on that after a couple of weeks when they wanted to wear different things to school. So in the locker rooms, we made sure that there was certain, like, they had to be in their own bay, really. I mean, there really wasn't anybody that chose to use it. And so we gave them that option, but we told them that the use of lockers was not going to happen. So our lockers were actually locked shut. All of them were. So if they were going to change clothes, I needed to keep all their clothes and their belongings with them. And that's actually how we did it. They kept their backpacks with them. Our students kept their backpacks. We don't have a backpack policy. They can carry them. So they kept their backpacks with them, and we just put them in a specific spot. Like, there's a tape on the wall where they could set their backpack down. So it was easy. And they kept all their belongings with them. When we went outside, they brought their backpacks with them outside. Like their personal belongings stayed with them at all times. They didn't get left in a gym while we went outside or anything like that. So if they chose to change, they did need to keep their clothes with them. And that it really worked very seamlessly. There was never an issue whatsoever. But like I said, I didn't have a whole lot of kids that actually took us up on that.
Thanks, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
So I am Jessica Matheson. I'm currently only in the classroom, but I'll be teaching. I convinced them to let me teach one PE class next semester again. So I'm getting back. But I know for us that we did not even allow it so far, that no students can change. And I'm going to be honest, students changed in the bathroom closest to my classroom, which is furthest from the gym. And of course, I'm not going to say anything, but it just got me thinking, that we're discouraging, healthy practices, and then kids feel like they need to go behind our backs. So it's just, I'm kind of trying to figure out, what the best practices are. And I really like that you offered it. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm coming from. But currently we do not even allow it. And backpacks are brought everywhere, just like you said as well. And then back to the face mask. Face masks are worn until they start moving. Same type of thing as well.
I would think it would be a reasonable thing to bring to your admin about about giving them the choice, because if they're already changing in the in the bathroom, I mean, I would give them a safe space to do that in the locker room. And I always tell them, like, you're not going in the locker room unless you're actually changing. So, I mean, it's really, there's only maybe 3, maybe 2 kids in there in the whole locker room. And so, you can either put X's down on the benches or whatever you need to do, but there's no one using our locker rooms. I mean, our sports teams aren't even using them. Everybody keeps their things with them. So
I don't, it hasn't been an issue so far.
I think that, from MDH's perspective, they're really concerned about that physical distancing piece. The other thing that your schools are probably have to also be aware of is the whole supervision concept. If you have, multiple students in there, because somebody's got to make sure that, what's supposed to be happening is happening. So, but that's a local decision and how that's all happening. So. Anything else on dressing out our lockers? Great. Moving on to, now let's talk about your activity selections. There are a number of considerations to help lower the risk of COVID-19 exposure and reduce the spread during class. The more people a student interacts with, the closer the interaction and the longer that interaction is, and the more sharing of equipment there is by multiple players, the higher the risk of COVID spread. Therefore, the risk of COVID spread can be different depending on your activity selections. In terms of FIED, the lowest risk that you can do is performing individual skill building practice tasks or individual activities or conditioning in school learning or alone while distance learning. The risk will increase putting students together in multi-student practice tasks or small-sided games and in-school learning. But for these tasks, there's less risks when students participate in consistent pods or during the same grouping during the entire school year and course time. And risk will increase if the students aren't in consistent pods. Risk also increases operating in a hybrid model because your students are both in school and at home for distance learning. So it's important to note that here MDH insists that 6 feet of physical distancing is absolutely required during this model, and performing individual skill building practice tasks, individual activities or conditioning is really the lowest risk option during hybrid. And consider avoiding multi-student practice tasks and small-sided games if physical distancing requirements and pod consistency can't be maintained. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff there. So let's look at this. In August, MDE released a couple of documents that gave some sample activities that you could be doing either in school or distance learning, working towards benchmarks. And the things are really just, they've taken the Shape America re-entry guidelines, and they had in the back of that some sample ways that you can meet outcomes with physical distancing, in distance learning or in school. And what we did is, this is the group of folks that I work with on the FIED leadership team is we took those and we Minnesotanized them. We placed them in focus areas across grade bands. We used K-2, 3-5, 6-8, and 9-12, followed by some sample activity ideas. You can use working towards those individual benchmarks that kind of follow this whole risk concept of activities. Obviously, and we'll talk about this standard thing in a little bit too, but you really need to consider to try to address all your standards at grade levels, prioritizing that need for physical distancing and masks, or limited or no use of equipment. And the emphasis of your standards, even during COVID, is the same. If you're at the elementary level, K-5, you've got emphasis in the development of motor skills and movement patterns, and locomotor, non-locomotor, manipulative. And grade 6-8 also focus on that standard 1 because you are taking those specialized fundamental motor skills and switching them into game categories and adding additional information and skill to that. And also on standards 2 and 3. And then at the high school level, your strong emphasis is on 3. Obviously, you are all working on all 5 standards, but the emphasis really hasn't changed from what we've talked about before. I'm going to share with you a couple of the activities that are in the charts really specific to standards 1 or 2. And again, these are just ideas to working towards it. They're just supposed to give you some ideas, low to moderate risk levels for standards 1 and 2. So here's a sample of in-school activity example for grades 3 to 5. For standard 1, motor skills and movement patterns, working on the locomotor horizontal jump grade span benchmarks. One activity could be that a student approaches a line on the floor, long jumps and landing on 2 feet. Or if a student is working on the manipulative focus area of catching, they can throw a ball at a wall or catch at varying levels. If the students are working on that balance focus area, between 0, 1, 2, 1 to 2, 1, 2, 1. Students can balance on different bases of support between lines of objects. Again, these are in-school things. For standard 2 movement concepts, they can also roll and throw a ball with a target and apply distance and directional tactics. For speed, force, and direction, students can travel in general space, changing speeds to rhythmic activities. And here's an example of in-school activity for grades 6 through 8. Again, standard 1, focus areas, net and wall games. Students can practice legally serving into a predetermined target during a badminton-like practice task. Or in the target game focus area, students can execute an underhand roll or toss with control and a bocce ball practice task. Also in standard 1, in the invasion game focus area, in middle school, students can use a long handled implement and shoot on a goal in an invasion game practice task. And again, you determine what game that is. Movement concepts in standard 2, in a target game for 6th grade, students can vary speed and force trajectory during a bowling practice task. So now let's look at the distance learning activity examples for grades K to 2. Again, in standard 1, these are kids now in distance learning. In the locomotor focus area of hop, gallop, slide, skip, or run, students can hop or gallop around in a room at home. In the manipulative focus area of catching, students can catch a self-tossed ball, such as a sock ball. And I know a lot of you are teaching them how to make those kinds of things at home. And in the locomotor focus area of horizontal jump, students can jump as high as they can 10 times. For standard 2 movement concepts, in the speed, force, and direction focus area, students can travel around a household object like a table or a couch and then do it slowly and then increase speed. And here's the last example of distance learning at the high school. So in standard 1, the motor skills and movement patterns for the lifetime activities and individual performance of outdoor pursuits, students can make a video or they can live stream with the teacher demonstrating competency or some of the activity specific movements in an individual performance activity outdoor pursuit like snowshoeing. Another standard 1 example of lifetime activities in a net wall game or target or aquatics that students can make a video or live stream with teachers demonstrating activity specific movements like to a target game like curling. Also standard 1 in the dance and rhythms, they can also make a video or live stream with a teacher demonstrating movements and activity specific movements like line dancing. In standard 2, at the high school level, about movement concepts, principles, and strategies through discussions with the teacher or on a worksheet provided, use the movement concepts to analyze and improve performance in yoga or Pilates. So those are just a few of the examples that are written in those activity documents that are on the MDE website. So as I've talked about this whole risk of activity thing, I want you to panel people, I want you to think about how have your activity selections changed in school during COVID-19, and what are some examples of physical activities you've done? And what are some examples of activities you've implemented at various grade levels and the adaptations you made to make it safer or have less risk of spread? So those are 2 pretty big questions, and you can tackle whatever part of them that you'd like. This is just really helpful just to talk about activity selection and risk. Okay, let you think about that for a minute.
Mary, this is Sue Tar again, and I had a pickleball class this fall semester and focused on singles games. Again, we had limited number of students allowed to enroll in the class, which helped, but singles games, which provided definitely the physical distance from your opponent plus then the people on the court next to you. And then when we moved to doubles section, everybody had to wear a mask. And so that again provided them that safety. And then they wore masks. Our campus mandated mask requirements for every physical activity toward the latter half of the semester, like October. So regardless of if you were treadmilling or pickleballing or whatever, you had to wear your masks 24/7. And so it worked and students didn't complain, but just the nature of choosing a singles game of pickleball versus a doubles game allowed more physical distancing.
And how did the group selection work for you? Did you put the same people together all the time, or did you mix it up? You didn't feel like that was, a big deal. Sometimes I struggle with this a little bit about the pod thing because people are coming in and out of things all the time. They're not together, more than an hour of that day. So how did you do that?
You're asking me, Mary?
I am asking you, yeah.
So yeah, for us, so our campus, university campus, 10,000 students, they aren't potted. So the 16 students I had came twice a week to pickleball, and who knows what they did outside of that 50-minute class. But while they were in the class, they were masked and socially distanced. They washed their hands. I don't know if they washed them before or after. I reminded them to, and then they had clean equipment to use. And if they didn't feel it was safe, then they could wear their golf gloves. So,
Great.
So we didn't, they could choose their partners when we went to doubles. I rotated them just for the fun of rotating, but we got who we got every day, and some were quarantined. They didn't come for 10 days. So then, we made those adjustments that way.
Yeah, thanks. I do find that the whole pod thing somewhat challenging just because we have so little control over what happens the other 23 hours of their lives. So anybody else want to address what they're doing or how they've handled?
Mary, this is Cindy Johnson from ESCO again. I know I was going to do pods if the classroom teachers were required to do pods, but our classroom teachers weren't required. So I made the decision not to do pods. I think my activities have changed, and it's dictated by the equipment I can use. For example, I'm not using real tennis balls. I'm not using yarn balls, fleece balls, a lot of things that I would normally use like at 3rd grade level. So I've changed some of those things because of what equipment can I even use. Some activities that I've chosen to do, I've stayed away pretty much from invasion games right now because I'm a little worried about that. I made a 12 by 12 square out on the playground, a bunch of them for the kids, and we played 4 square, feeling like they would be far enough apart. They were sharing a playground ball, but we hand sanitized and cleaned the ball at the end. At the upper elementary, grades 5 and 6, I tried speed mitten. Just before break, we did pickleball.
Great. Yeah, I know that equipment adjustments was really important because that's another thing that SHAPE really talked about is don't use those soft sided materials like yarn balls, things like that, because they can't be cleaned effectively. So yeah, that's definitely a change that you made for activity.
Mary?
Yeah.
This is Pete. We're just doing a bowling unit right now, and every kid has one of those Nerf or like a dodgeball size for a bowling ball. So we don't have to share bowling balls. Each kid has their own, and they get 2 pins. So we're working on the form rather than how many pins you can knock over. So that way there's less contact with equipment. So kids can have their own individual stuff. And then we have enough for 2 classrooms, so can disinfect 1 set and get it ready for the next class that follows. And so we just alternate equipment.
I saw you put that up on Twitter, Pete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That's what we're doing for that unit, like, so everyone has their equipment and less contact through that means.
Thanks. Okay, so moving on. We're doing really good, everybody. Hang in there with me now. Okay, so one thing I wanted to tell you about, and we're going to move into standards now, is that through the CDC, Minnesota has a grant that focuses on nutrition, physical activity, and I forget what it's mental health, physical activity, mental health. Anyway, we got some extra money for that. And so for that, MDE and MDH have come together to create this website specific for COVID-19 resources. And it also covers nutrition. Now I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, health and safety, meals and snacks, PE and PA, social emotional learning, and out of school time. So I just wanted to give you an idea. This is what's on the physical education end and the physical education / PE. The left side, my left side of the screen, the COVID-19 resources, the federal guidance, the Minnesota guidance, the sports specific guidance, and the resources. Those are all live right now. They went live this week, but it only went out to the nutrition directors first this week, and it goes out in the superintendent mailbag next week. And so I'll get that link to MNSHAPE so they can post that as well and send that out to you. The videos for PE and PA are around health and safety guidance for physical education, which is very similar to what we just did. And then there's a trauma sensitive guidance for physical education that really focuses really strongly on social emotional learning. And then with the two physical activity pieces are considerations for physical activity, somewhat similar to what I just told you, and the guidelines to participate in youth sports. Those are all the communications right now. The Phi-Ed ones are fine because most of the stuff in them doesn't change. The issue around physical activity, particularly in guidance around youth sports, changes. It changes, and the high school league comes out with some things based on what the CDC is saying. So right now they're kind of held up because MDH has got to review them, but they will also be out there. And it covers a lot of the stuff that we just did. Okay, so moving on to standards. So one of the questions I get, are standards still required? Absolutely, they are still required during COVID. Nothing is not being taught, or you don't get permission to skip English or social studies or geography or any of this stuff. Everything is still required. Phi-Ed is a state standard area. Health ed, of course, is locally delivered, but it's locally designed, but it still has to happen, and instruction's got to happen by a licensed person in that area. So again, health requirements haven't changed. Local school districts develop the standards, curriculum, assessments to meet them, and then the high school people determine the amount of credit. They can grade band them if they want, or they can go individual school district level. Again, no changes on health education. In terms of physical education, no change there either. We are still with all students K-8 have to get Phi-Ed in Minnesota every year. In high school, at least once. Credit is determined and time is determined at the local level. Right now, schools are operated under the 2010 Phi-Ed standards, which just identifies those 6 standards, and then schools identify the benchmarks and then make the curriculum and assessments to meet them. However, you all know we're switching next year, and that has not changed yet, to the 2018 standards and grade level benchmarks. And so the Phi-Ed requirements, no, have not changed. I did get calls about, do we still have to do Phi-Ed in distance learning? Do we still have to do Phi-Ed in hybrid learning? The answer to that is absolutely yes, you do. I forget if I put this slide in here around some Phi-Ed folks were getting reassigned to teach or assist a classroom teacher, and then Phi-Ed didn't happen that semester. Well, the rule is that then at some point in time, that school district has to talk about where in that school year the students are going to get physical education. If they didn't do it first semester, then something's got to happen second semester, and those are local conversations that had to be had. So again, if you look at our standards, our health standards and our Phi-Ed standards, these things are so foundational to help students, you know, just kind of navigate their healthy decisions around healthy living and what they're doing when they're in home or at school. So Shape America has taken a really strong stand around the importance of social emotional learning and on how our standards integrate that concept throughout all of them. They have a great document where CASEL, the Collaborative of Social Emotional Learning, they have all of these learning competencies, and they've aligned them with national outcomes for physical education, which has been a great thing because, again, it allows us, because we really need to be focusing on what students really need around social and emotional learning. So given that, and just to remind you, the 5 competencies in a social emotional framework, we've got core. The first one is around self-management and the ability to successfully regulate one's emotions. Then there's a core competency of responsible decision-making, the ability to make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions. Sounds a lot like our standards. The third core competency is social awareness and the ability to take perspective and empathize with others, including those with diverse backgrounds. And then there's the one, the self-awareness core competency, the ability to accurately recognize one's emotions, thoughts, and values, and to accurately assess one's own strengths and limitations. And the final SEL core competency is relationship skills, the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships. So what I've done is I took that core competency space or place with that aligned the outcomes of Shape America and aligned them to our own benchmarks. So specifically aligning them with standards 3, 4, and 5. So on the next slides, you'll see some examples of the SEL core competencies and related skills that operate within our benchmarks that I'm hoping that we're focusing on and paying attention to. And I'm just giving you a few examples here just for the sake of time. For standard 3, under the self-management focus area, the following benchmarks fall under the self-discipline SEL related skills. For 6th graders, identify possible causes of stress and the negative effects of stress on health. For 7th graders, identify several strategies for dealing with stress, like deep breathing, guided visualization, or aerobic exercise. And again, these benchmarks align with the SEL related skill of stress management. In standard 4, under the self-management focus area, these 3 benchmarks fall under the self-discipline SEL related skills. 2nd graders work respectively in small or large group activities while sharing equipment and space. 8th graders establish guidelines for resolving conflict and apply them to respond appropriately to classmates' ethical or unethical behavior during physical activity. And high school students employ effective self-management skills to analyze barriers and modify physical activity patterns appropriately as needed. Also on standard 4, core competencies and related skills can be found in social awareness focus area. 7th graders accept differences among classmates in physical development, maturation, and varying skill levels by providing encouragement. And this is an SEL related skill of appreciating diversity. 8th graders cooperate and problem solve with classmates in large group initiatives or gameplay. And 9th graders exhibit proper etiquette, respect for others, and teamwork while engaging in physical activity or social dance. Both of these benchmarks fall under the SEL related skill of respect for others. And finally, in standard 4, some SEL core competencies and related skills are found in the self-awareness focus area. Kindergartners express enjoyment when being physically active individually or with others. And this is an SEL related skill of identifying emotions. And 6th graders recognize individual challenges in physical activity and implement methods of coping with them in a positive way. For example, extending effort, asking for help or feedback, or modifying tasks. This is an SEL related skill of accurate self-perception. And 8th graders develop a plan of action and make appropriate decisions based on that plan when faced with an individual or group challenge. And this is an SEL related skill of recognizing strengths. So given all of those things, Shape America has integrated the core competencies into their Health Moves Minds initiative, and is having a great impact really across the country on active schools, environments, and teaching children how to cope with stress or bullying or social pressures. And it just has made all the difference. So I encourage you to really concentrate on really focus on the SEL competencies in our standards 3, 4, and 5 during COVID-19, because our children and our students are coming to us in trauma-related situations that they've never experienced before. And it's really important that we work towards these. And this just gives us the opportunity to highlight some of those SEL competencies that we have integrated into our benchmarks. So panel question here for anybody: what kind of social emotional strategies have you utilized with your students in the different learning models?
Mary, I can speak to that. This is Tom Roberts again, and coincidentally, I'm the Health Moves Minds coordinator for the state of Minnesota here for MNSHAPE, and this is a great segue for this, Mary, and thank you for touching on this. But the Health Moves Minds program does a great job of giving our students the tools to be aware of their emotions and to deal with their emotions and to identify those emotions with various things like with my students. And your question is, what are we doing with SEL in our classes? I'm doing the mindful minutes, which is, focusing on breathing. And I'm also doing the halted model that Shape America has for Health Moves Minds, which is H is hungry, A is angry, L is lonely, T is tired, E is enthusiastic embarrassed, and D is disappointed. And what I did for one lesson is I had my students tell me on Seesaw or act out what one of those emotions would look like. So that was a way to get them to be in touch more with their feelings and what each emotion looks like.
Yeah, that's great, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary.
I'm going to wait you out on this one, y'all. If I could get another one or two to address this, because this is so important, and I think you're doing it. I just think it's important that we acknowledge things with each other.
Hi, Mary. This is Carla Nordenstrom from White Bear Lake again. I'm doing some character curriculum work with some of my kids. So we read a passage and then I put them into breakout rooms with specific questions, and they answer that with their team about what it meant and just some feedback on that story and how it applies to their personal lives. And then we go back and we talk about it as a large group.
Great, thanks. I'm assuming some of you are using such things like individual check-ins with your kids, sending your kids positive notes about how are you doing? I'm thinking about you. I'm looking for things like that you guys are incorporating just to make those connections with kids, because it's all about those connections before we can really get into the physical activity pieces.
There's some stuff in the chat too, Mary, that you're
Okay.
not seeing.
Yeah,
that
I'm not
people are like Derek's shared an emoji check-in with some student or with us that he uses with some students, and for a Seesaw activity to be used digitally, and so that's great. And then as far as like high school check-ins go, so we have a We have several opportunities for students to connect with us, which is great. And I always give my students an actual Google Voice number too. So I don't give them my phone number, but I created a Google Voice number. So if students need to reach out, if they're struggling for whatever reason, then they have an adult that they can trust and reach out to. And, you know, I let them know that, and some have used it. And especially now where we're not super far into distance learning. We're only about 2 weeks into it, but I've already been hearing a lot from my students about how it's taking a huge mental toll on them. On the high school students, and just that it's way more than they bargained for, and that it's way different than hybrid and just all of that. And so I asked them, I asked them what they need, you know, like what do you need from us? And so, and they're honest. They are very honest. So I don't know. I mean, as far as like the littles go, I think you guys are doing a great job, you know, Derek, with that thing, and really keeping that positive vibe going. I mean, trying to do that with the high school is so important. And Jessica asked us in the chat earlier about how to engage high school. Well, I think she meant high schoolers, but all students to have their videos on, or to, you know, to be there in the class. And I actually said to my students today, you know, that I had been doing some self-reflecting on how this is going. And the only spot that I'm really struggling in is the fact that I'm talking to a screen of names all day. And that I really love seeing their faces. And, you know, I've seen on Twitter, people are saying offer extra credit, or offer this, or do a background, you know, challenge on, you know, design a personal background that you want to show to everybody. And that works for a certain amount of time. And, you know, Megan shared in the chat using the filter on Zoom, like we use WebEx, so I don't even have that as an option for me to do stuff like that. But I would if I could. But today I just really had a real conversation with my students about what this is doing to me as a teacher as well. And what helps me is to see their faces. And as soon as I talked to them about that and said, like, you guys, that keeps me going. You're the reason why I'm here. Ding, 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 ding. Like they all came on. And I thanked them. And I said, I understand that sometimes it's a bandwidth thing, and that turning on your video slows everything down and it makes it difficult. And you have several people. And I said, I know that it's not possible for everybody, and that's okay. But I'm like, even if I can see a couple of you, and even if it's for 10, you know, for a little bit of the class, and it was that was cool and helpful. And my students gave me good feedback on that. And they were just like, you know, sometimes we just want to turn off, and we don't feel like we're like looking at ourselves. And I'm like, that's fine, but just put it on grid view. But I don't know about any other SEL stuff for high school, but just talking with them and giving them that platform to talk and to have a safe space has been successful for me.
Mary, I was in a faculty meeting, or a special ed and specialist meeting at 3 o'clock today, and the principal brought up how one of the third grade teachers at 2:30 every day now, she's just turning Zoom on and letting the kids talk to each other, because all the other distance learning, when they're online and they're on Zoom and all that, it's a teacher talking to them and they don't get to share. And I think that was just a great idea, just to let them talk to each other, because they don't get to do that.
That is an awesome idea. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move us on, but thanks for sharing around that social emotional stuff. I really felt like we needed to spend a little bit of time with a strong focus on that. So about instructional strategies during COVID for physical education, and the strategies on this slide are relative for physical education, regardless of whatever learning model you're in. And a lot of these come from Shape America, about integrating all the COVID requirements. Obviously, about balancing your learning options to include all 4 domains, and don't make it all physical. Some of it has got to be more effective. There's just got to be psychological, mental kinds of concepts on your learning options. Include more individual pursuits rather than traditional team activities. And then use games and activities that require no physical contact and don't require students to be in close proximity. Include opportunities for student choice and incorporate student suggested activities where appropriate. Assess all of the state standards as you can with both formative and some summative assessment. And these are instructional strategies, again, from Shape America around distance learning. Shape America recommends teachers be patient, obviously. And now that we're in December and we've been experiencing 8 months of this, we're all very clear about that. And we know, just as Lisa was just sharing about, not all students are in the same home situation. Some of them may be able to turn on their video all the time and some may not be, depending on bandwidth in the house, how many students are in the house, if their parents are working from home, and then all the other dynamics that go in with that. So our flexibility is extremely important on this. And there's so many factors that that figures into a student's success that are out of their control and out of yours. Creating consistency in those classroom routines. It just creates that familiarity because you're used to the students coming into the gym and you're seeing each other. And so now it's like how you build that relationship again. Providing opportunities for students to design, monitor, and evaluate their own physical activity preferences. And then have students choose their activities and describe how their activity impacted their flexibility or their cardiovascular health or their muscular strength and their endurance, and get them using that language. Include activities and assignments using technology when it's feasible. And of course, that whole thing about balancing screen time and activity time. And holding dedicated office hours so students can reach you or schedule other means. I'm going to talk about this at the end, but last spring we did a webinar around distance learning with all of the online schools that have been teaching physical education for years. And a lot of them were talking about the importance of these dedicated office hours so students could get a hold of them, and offering just that space for students to check in or just come in and just like CJ was saying, to talk to each other. Extremely important. So, and explore using parks or green spaces for outdoor learning. And if they need equipment, you need to provide it. One of the online schools talked about that. If they required them to use anything, they provided it. So, and when a hybrid model, again, Shape America talks about the importance of a flipped classroom. And that's that approach where the teacher assigns to complete home, and then like videos and auto recordings and quizzes, and then once they're completed, when they come back into school, that they put them all into practical use. So a flipped classroom is something that can happen during hybrid and works well. And finally, around physical education assessment. There are so many assessment tools available for gathering data on student knowledge and performance. Selecting the appropriate tool depends on the tool's ability to provide what you're looking for and your performance criteria. Shape America talks about when you select your assessments, you should remember the context of the teaching environment, i.e. the space, the number of students, the ability of the availability of equipment, the learning environment, whether they're in school or in distance learning. And we just got to understand that during this, assessment happens in a lot of ways. It always has, but especially during this time of COVID, we really need to think about that. Use backward plannings in developing assessments and provide a variety of assessments that address all standards. Offer opportunities for students to choose how they'll demonstrate their knowledge. It's a more equitable approach, and use formative assessments to determine concepts students will understand, and simple rubrics if you're using rubrics. Okay, so about the physical education standards professional development. As you know, we were in the midst of this 3-year plan to get us all ready for full implementation of our new physical education standards. And we've spent a lot of time talking about standards and learning progressions and deconstructing and bundling. And then we talked about last year assessments and grading and best practices. And then COVID came. So now this is a schematic that my colleagues in academic standards put together. And that's actually after they saw ours, which was pretty cool. They just loved what we had come up with. But this is another way we're kind of talking about this whole curriculum development process. And right now, you're all kind of in that point where you're looking at your bundles, and your next spot is right in here, distributing the bundles across your year and planning performance outcomes, and then unpacking them to identify content. So all lessons and students will learn, and that transfers to daily lesson content and planning. Unfortunately, I totally understand that during COVID, it's like your focus has really just got to be on getting yourself and your kids through day-to-day stuff. So I'm doing the best I can to try to get you through this as well, but I will guarantee you that the last 8 months of my life has all been around health and safety around FIED, less around standard implementation. So that's a challenge. One of the things that we have done is actually we've created a new bundling resources for those of you who have kind of remember the bundling and kind of don't. Our academic standards team actually adopted what we did in our whole standards implementation process in year one. And I've created this bundling video that takes all content areas, through the bundling process, and the importance of the steps that you take prior to that. I was extremely proud because they loved the work that we did. And Sutar, if you're still on, the whole salad analogy went really well over with our academic standards team, which is pretty cool. You and Christy came up with that, and they really enjoyed that. So we have now done this bundling resource, and it was ready to go. We have one little snippet. I don't know if any of you guys are using avatars in your teaching, because I love avatars. Well, the four of us used avatars on one of the pages on the slides. And I guess apparently we're not supposed to do that. So we got to redo it because we can't use avatars. So now you'll see my picture on it instead. So it'll be ready soon. And as soon as it's ready, I'll kind of get it out there. In the meantime, other things that has happened is working with and developing these resources for you. Last spring and into early fall, MNSHAPE and MDE have partnered to try to figure out resources for you to help you, especially in distance learning, because that's what we were hearing. And we were hearing you needed help with activities and how are you figuring out how to do distance learning? And then what do you do if you have the internet or you don't? So we created these learning resources that are on the MNSHAPE website right now. They're also on the MDE website. But the big thing that we figured out around online resources is you guys are not on social media. This is where everything is happening right now in terms of how we're talking to each other, how we're sharing, how we're meeting all these hurdles and meeting the benchmarks and using the standards. And so what we tried to do on these online resources is to talk about the websites, but also social media and Facebook groups that are out there for FIED, and what kind of social media is out there for Twitter hashtags, and who you should be following, and where you can get your information, because that's where right now we're getting the information that we need. Then there's also this whole concept of analog for teachers who don't have the internet, and how can we provide them activities that align to the benchmarks, require little equipment, that require little adult supervision, that you can use in household items, and that need limited space. And so really what we've done for these is we've taken things from like the open site who does such a great job of aligning benchmarks to activities, to providing some sample assessments, and created them so they work in an analog way. Now, of course, the best thing we want teachers to do is to be able to download them and provide them for print with students if possible, or things like that. So that's what those analog resources are about. This is this webinar I told you about, is a teaching online PE webinar that I brought together 4 different schools that actually have been teaching online for a long time. And I've asked them these kinds of questions. You know, what's the biggest difference for you teaching online? What's your platform? What do you do about equipment? How do you sign in your students? What's the reasonable participation expectation? How do you track students? And how do you collect student work? And this is all on there. And I'm giving you the link to that webinar is on this slide. Also should go into the chat, which I will do that as soon as I get off this. All right. So then we have all kinds of MDE resources that are out there around COVID-19. I've got like 6 resources around there around physical education requirements and distance learning and non-distance learning. And then of course we've got our physical education webpage. And then there's 2 different presentations, one from MNSHAPE and one from MNDE that are out there on the different sites. So I think I got to quit because I think we're at end time. So I'm going to stop showing my slide and let us reach some closure. But all I can say is I am hoping that you will continue to come to these professional development opportunities, and that we'll be able to apply all the things we talked about around health and safety and standards and implement them maybe more deeply than we did this time. I'm going to quit sharing my screen. So Tom and Lisa, you can sure close us out. I didn't realize we were getting so late. My fault.
You're right on time, Mary. No worries, no worries. It's 6:01. That's all good. You guys, we will send out the link to her presentation, so you have those links and those live links at the end, so that you have that. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Tom or Mary with anything that you need going forward, or if you have any questions or anything. We are here, and if we don't have the answer right away, we will put you in touch with somebody who does have that. And Megan just said in the chat that this recording will be posted to our website on YouTube as well. So if you do want to show this to other people or direct people to it, it's there for their viewing if they need as well. So if anybody has any questions, anything to close us out, otherwise I'm going to tell you all to have a great night. And please join us next month as we continue our different sessions and bringing really great professional development to you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job, Mary. Thank you.
Really appreciate you. Thanks for all you
Excellent
do.
job.